Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the second panel on ocean alkalinity enhancement. This panel is titled Assessing Ocean Alkalinity Enhancement as a Climate Solution and Resilience Tool. We're honored to have some opening remarks today from the Ulu o Tokelau, Kelihiano Kalolo. The Ulu o Tokelau, the Honorable Kelihiano Kalolo, has an extensive political career with his role as the Minister of Climate, Oceans, and Resilience and the Minister of Education. In addition, he serves as the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Tokelau Public Service, where he served prior to his third term as political leader of Tokelau. It is also important to note that during the Honorable Kalolo's run, he has had the opportunity to hold ministerial portfolios in economic development, natural resources, and environment, including agriculture. It's with great pleasure for Ulu Kalolo, the Minister for Climate Change, Oceans, and Resilience, to humbly welcome the opportunity to speak on ocean acidification and highlight the importance of keeping the ocean healthy and alive, not only for Tokelau, the Pacific, but also for the planet. The ocean is life and home to Tokelau, and working together for a healthier ocean fills Tokelau and her people with hope. Hope that ocean acidification will not destroy their home. So Tokelau will keep fighting. Tokelau will not sit and let their home fade away. Tokelau, along with other low-lying atolls, will continue to take action for their people and for future generations to come. Again, it is an honor and a privilege for Tokelau to continue her climate change advocacy with The Ocean is Our Life, as well as the opportunity to add value to the climate action conversation. So I welcome the Ulu to come and give some opening remarks here.
Thank you. Honorable leaders, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Maloni, greetings from Tokelau. Let me start by thanking the organizers of this event. I am delighted for the opportunity extended to Tokelau to be part of this collaboration. The ocean is life and home to Tokelau and her people. To talk about ocean acidification, we must recognize that the ocean is central to the identity, culture, sustainable development of Tokelau and the Pacific region as a whole. We take seriously our role as custodians and our responsibility for shared stewardship of the ocean, a role that stems from many centuries of our connection with and reliance on the ocean. The ocean is also an integral component of the global climate system. As such, it is particularly relevant to the vitality of our atolls, climate and weather, ecosystems, and livelihoods. Mr. Chairperson, we are privileged to be part of the Pacific Partnership on Ocean Acidification, launched during the United Nations Third Small Island Developing States Conference held in Samoa in September 2014. The project, funded by New Zealand and Monaco, was a collaborative effort among Pacific Islands to study and understand the risks posed by ocean acidification. In Tokelau, we first set about identifying and implementing practical adaptation actions by conducting the ecosystem and social resilience assessment and mapping. This process guided the implementation of adaptation activities such as planting and restoration and selected sites as well as a community approach in keeping the ocean and coastal areas clean. The other components were research and monitoring, whereby the project established chemical and biological baselines and capacity building and awareness raising at the village level. This component was less successful due to isolation and compounding complications with COVID-19 lockdowns, the need for further training of staff, and accessibility to a lab. Mr. Chairperson, the world had a slight reprieve from warming during the COVID-19 pandemic, but that time also impacted supply chains and delayed implementation of coastal restoration and adaptation projects. As emissions began rising and world opened, we came to the end of our ocean acidification project, and there were no more resources to continue this work. Yet, climate change continues to exacerbate extreme climate events, threatening droughts and lack of freshwater availability, in addition to threats to our lives and the life of the islands. Tokelau must continue to engage with you in these COP negotiations to find ways to thrive in the future. Maloni, kohetaila.
Thank you very much for those remarks. So we all know that the climate is changing. This climate change and ocean acidification is really being driven by the huge amounts of CO2 that we're putting out into the atmosphere. We're all here at COP to do something about it, right? Both in terms of mitigating climate and coming up with solutions to what's happening to our climate and the oceans. See if I click this, nothing's happening. Click this one, aha, here we go. Oh, that was supposed to be up, okay. So I've seen a few different versions of this plot. This is probably not the last one you're gonna see at this meeting. What this is showing is the emissions rate of CO2 through time, moving from the left to the right. And the red line is what we as a society need to do to reduce emissions to get us to below 2 degrees Celsius of warming. The number one thing that's going to get us there is reducing our CO2 emissions. It means stopping to emit as much CO2 as we can. Unfortunately, this isn't going to get us all the way. And what we need to do in addition to emissions reductions to meet these climate goals is actually remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And that's that blue, the negative part of this plot. So in addition to emissions reductions, we really need to be looking into ways to actively remove CO2 from the atmosphere. That CO2 has to go somewhere, right? We have to put it somewhere. We could put it on land or under land, but of course we all live on land. There's all sorts of other uses for land. And so people have started to think about, well, what if that CO2 could make it into the oceans? And that's not a bad thought, because actually the oceans are one of the largest, if not the largest reservoir of carbon on the planet. As you can see on this graphic, the deep ocean and the upper ocean combined have 50 times more carbon in it than the atmosphere, just naturally. About 15 to 20 times more carbon than all land plants and soils combined. And about 5,000 times more carbon than what we traditionally think of as sort of blue carbon, these coastal carbon ecosystems like seagrasses and mangroves and coral reefs. So the ocean has a lot of potential here, and a lot of people have become interested in the ocean as a carbon dioxide removal media, where this carbon's going to go. We're here today to talk about ocean alkalinity enhancement, and we could get very technical very quickly, but we're going to try to not do that. I'm happy to talk to you more about the technical details. But really, when we're talking about ocean alkalinity enhancement, the ocean is suffering from warming and acidification. And what ocean alkalinity enhancement might be able to do is to accelerate the ocean's natural ability to safely and effectively take up CO2 and balance ocean chemistry at the same time. So it is kind of a joint problem in terms of the carbon dioxide removal and the mitigation of ocean acidification effects. What we're talking about, what this actually means, is that we would add liquid or solid alkaline materials to the marine environment, and that might help to store more carbon and offset ocean acidification. So this is a mitigation approach. We're talking about adding things to the ocean. You can think about this like an antacid tablet, right? Like a Tums that you would add to help balance that ocean chemistry and help the ocean take up more CO2 at the same time. So this fits into a broader framework of what we're all here to do. This is a very sort of technical and new application, but of course, we should be thinking about how ocean alkalinity enhancement sort of fits into the broader context of sustainable development goals, ocean acidification monitoring, ocean health, and ecosystems, and of course the livelihoods of everyone who rely on the ocean for their way of life and their subsistence. So we have a really great panel here today to discuss these sort of broader impacts of ocean alkalinity enhancement. We have Gabby Kitch, who's the Marine Carbon Dioxide Removal Program Lead for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We have Jessie Turner, the Executive Director of the Ocean Acidification Alliance. Ben Rubin, the Executive Director and co-founder of the Carbon Business Council, and Katie Lebling, who's an associate in carbon removal at the World Resources Institute. So we'll kind of go through and give everyone a chance to introduce themselves and sort of what they're up to in this space, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A and some audience questions after that. So I'll pass it off to Gabby to get it going.
Great. Testing this microphone. Great. Thank you, Adam, and thanks for the opportunity to discuss NOAA's carbon dioxide removal, equities and engagement, as well as ocean alkalinity enhancement. Do we want to go to the next slide? Thanks. Great. So NOAA's mission is based in science, stewardship, and service. Given that carbon dioxide removal will potentially grow a new carbon sink in the ocean, on land, et cetera, our mission, which is firmly rooted in Earth system monitoring, observing, and monitoring, is going to be critically impacted by CDR. So NOAA has significant equities in carbon dioxide removal, and specifically when those strategies interact with other NOAA priorities, for example, ocean acidification mitigation. So really, I think two products that highlight NOAA's growing equities in the carbon dioxide removal space are, one, our strategy for carbon dioxide removal at NOAA, and also our marine carbon dioxide research program. NOAA's carbon dioxide removal research strategy really talks about how NOAA's experience, how our capabilities can assist the carbon dioxide removal ecosystem. Really, we outline 4 key NOAA assets where we can do so to reduce uncertainties of carbon dioxide removal and also address some of the impacts of carbon dioxide removal. So our observing networks, as well as our modeling capabilities, will be critical to understanding if carbon dioxide removal strategies are effective. And that is what most people refer to as monitoring, reporting, and verification of carbon dioxide removal. Also, our environmental or ecosystem research can be leveraged to understand both potential risks to marine health and also impacts that could be positive, like we mentioned, ocean acidification mitigation for one, to understand kind of those impacts better. Ultimately, NOAA science can really help produce these decision support products for a diverse range of partners who might consider CDR, carbon dioxide removal, as well as specifically marine CDR in their climate mitigation portfolios. I also want to highlight that while we're here to talk about ocean alkalinity enhancement today, our carbon dioxide removal research strategy is technology agnostic, so it also includes land-based techniques. NOAA's commitment to responsible research also is highlighted by our lead role in our marine carbon dioxide research programs. We have offered both funding opportunities in 2022 and a larger one in this year, 2023, that launched in September. And we've utilized the National Oceanographic Partnerships Program to do so in order to bring together interagency, federal U.S. agencies together to generate funding for these opportunities. And the NOP is really important, the National Oceanographic Partnerships Program, because it does allow us to create these funding opportunities for topics that really cross agency mission lines. So our research portfolio, I can't go into it today, but please take a look at this link that's on the slide there that will take you to our project features. But in 2023, we worked with 4 total agencies, including NOAA. So NOAA, the Department of Energy, the Office of Naval Research, and the National Science Foundation, along with our our private partner, philanthropic partner, the ClimateWorks Foundation, to generate $24.3 million in funding to support 17 different research projects on marine CDR. And these projects, there's 17 of them, like I said, they really capture laboratory experiments, modeling experiments, some field-based trials, as well as community engagement projects. I'll highlight that in this funding process, interagency work has been critical. So NOAA is thrilled to see the US government standing up a new fast-track action committee on marine CDR, which will bring together all the different agencies as a united front to address different priorities. And again, while I don't have time to talk about the fast-track action committee now, I'm hoping that we can dig into it during our panel discussion.
Lovely. Thank you, Gabby. And my name is Jessie Turner, and I am the director of something called the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification. And Adam, you said that we can get very technical very quickly, but fortunately for you all, I cannot get very technical very quickly. So I'm much more of a higher level policy perspective that I'll be bringing today. And I'll just give you a little bit of background about who is the Alliance. So we were launched in 2016 by 3 different state governments, actually, of the U.S. in California, Oregon, Washington, and the province of British Columbia in Canada. And we were launched because some of those areas, particularly in Washington and Oregon, had seen some of the first ever direct observed impacts of ocean acidification on oyster hatchery production out in on the West Coast. And there's lots of dynamics that have occurred to make that the case, particularly upwelling, although upwelling is not unique just to the Pacific coast of North America. But because of that, there was really this sustained effort on ocean acidification research and management response coming from the West Coast states between 2013, 15, 16, 17, and beyond. And that would really laid the foundation for the work of the Alliance and saying, yes, we need to reduce emissions, the #1 cause of acidification. But we also need to be thinking about what are the local scale adaptation and resilience strategies, and what information do we need to deploy those effectively in different locations. And that's really the background for thinking about how we could bring other governments into this conversation. And I'll just say that, just as an opening remark for this panel, I think we've talked a lot about marine carbon dioxide removal as an OA mitigation tool. And I think we were afraid, or I'll say Jessie was afraid, from the beginning of the marine carbon dioxide removal conversations that really started coming into the forefront over the last 2 or 3 years, picking up more awareness and focus, that ocean acidification would really be used as a calling card for all marine carbon dioxide removal. And people saying, look at this ocean acidification, we need to do something, therefore carte blanche, marine carbon dioxide removal is the answer. And it was really important to us as a community of policy practitioners. So our membership is national governments, state governments, tribal, port, municipalities, along with several affiliate members, which are non-government partners. And we really wanted to make sure that ocean acidification wasn't just used as, like I said, open door to sort of point to the need to rapidly accelerate all marine carbon dioxide removal. But that said, we also recognize that not all strategies are the same, and nor will they uniformly affect ocean acidification. So some carbon dioxide removal strategies will, in fact, remove and store carbon removed from the ocean. Some might reduce ocean acidification, some might accelerate ocean acidification. But in this case, we're talking about ocean alkalinity enhancement, and so that's what we'll be talking about today during the panel conversation. But to kind of help our membership shape the conversation we wanted to be having, we put out these principles of marine carbon dioxide removal strategies at the beginning of this year. This is truly a collaboration of 12 different governments, 4 national, 4 state, tribe, First Nation, port government that are part of our exec team. And the big takeaways that we have, of course, are not all strategies are the same. We obviously don't want to be diminishing ambition and urgency and funding for actions that reduce atmospheric CO2, and that research really needs to be prioritized realistically. And we'll talk in this panel about how we think of realistic prioritizing. And for us, it's really a matter of scale, global versus local. And so that's what our conversations will be about today in the panel. So thank you for inviting me, Adam, and over to you, Ben.
Great. Yeah, so great to see everybody here today. Thank you for joining for the panel. And Adam, thank you for organizing us and pulling folks together. I think what's great as we're going through introducing ourselves, sharing our vantage point on this is when we're talking about the ocean and we're talking about ocean alkalinity enhancement in particular, this is so cross-cutting that it's requiring the expertise and perspectives that we're seeing here for governments coming together in a coalition effort and how nonprofits are thinking about this and how a federal government is thinking about it. I run the Carbon Business Council. We're a nonprofit trade association of largely startups who are working on scaling up carbon removal and building towards gigaton scale CDR. The trade association has over 100 companies. When you add up each company, many of them are early stage startups, but when you combine it, just to give a sense of the market, it's about 16.5 billion in combined assets based on what the different startups have raised. The Carbon Business Council is technology neutral. So we look at ocean alkalinity enhancement alongside direct air capture, other forms of marine carbon removal, land-based carbon removal like enhanced rock weathering. It really spans the gamut, and I think what we see is each pathway has its own unique co-benefits for communities, unique challenges that have to be worked out, and we'll dig deeper into that for ocean alkalinity enhancement in particular during the conversation today. But I also think there's some overarching commonalities across carbon removal that we also look at that some of them have already been touched on. So Gabby was talking about monitoring, reporting, verification. That's a big one for all forms of CDR. How do we know that carbon removal is working? And that's going to be really important for ocean alkalinity enhancement and all of these different CDR pathways for them to take off. So just a couple of different tracks of work that we're moving on that I wanted to call out, and I can expand on each of these more as we get into the discussion. One is that we convene policy working groups within the coalition to get companies thinking through where is their cohesion, where is their policy alignment. One of our issue briefs on defining carbon removal that's listed there and as a resource online. I know the font is too small to read here. It's a great resource for just what does carbon removal mean and what does it look like? And this is really the case for having a tech neutral approach and a level playing field for policy. And we're seeing that play out in federal policy where in the Energy Department landmark procurement program where more than $30 million is earmarked for the U.S. federal government to purchase carbon removal. Marine carbon removal is included in that. So we're seeing a lot of that tech neutral policy play out. We have a working group right now on marine carbon removal, and we'll be releasing a dedicated issue brief on that soon, early in 2024, to touch on ocean alkalinity enhancement and some others. We also, in addition to these working groups, we also spend a lot of time with the startups thinking about community engagement and responsible deployment. As we're scaling up carbon removal and commercializing it, what does it look like to engage in communities and understand what community concerns might be, understand what community opportunities there might be, where does a project site make the most sense for deployment. So we have a couple of resources on that. The one that's a screenshot there is an online training that we released just a month or two ago, CDR RDT, Responsible Deployment Training. It's a 1-hour online training that just starts getting project developers exposed to the tenets of early community engagement, two-way dialogue, and thinking through what best practices might look like. It's an hour, so it's introductory, but I do think it covers some helpful foundational concepts. And then in general, we also, to the extent we can, want to just exist to be a resource for anyone looking to take a deeper dive into carbon removal. So that takes a couple of different forms for us. One particular one is we put out a bi-weekly newsletter, The Carbon Fix, that's rounding up who are the different startups out there that are raising rounds, collecting new money. This is a good way to stay up to date of who is out there that's working on ocean alkalinity enhancement in particular. We're fortunate to have several companies in the coalition that are working on that. But I think just to track the startups that are in the mix, we put together a policy digest to keep track of what's moving and where, and so just wanted to flag that resource as well. So that's a little bit on us and some of the different things that we are actively putting out as resources for all of you, and very much looking forward to the conversation, to hearing questions that you all have, and thanks again, Adam.
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me and for everyone being here today. I'm Katie, I'm from the World Resources Institute. And WRI is a global nonprofit research institute. We work on a number of different topics, from food to cities, at the intersection of climate, human development, and nature. And we've been working on carbon removal for about 5 years, and ocean CDR for about 2 years. And we started looking into ocean CDR because we saw there was just a huge amount of interest in the topic, and at the same time, not a huge knowledge base in terms of the efficacy of the approaches, the ecological impacts of them, and so we thought it's important to say something about how this field should be developing. And so we put out this report that's on the left-hand side last year at COP, and this kind of looks at some basics about each of the proposed approaches that are out there, a summary of the governance landscape at the international level, assuming that if we're trying to get to gigaton scale, we will need to be doing this in the high seas. And then it has some high-level recommendations. So one of those, kind of the top-line one that I think everyone can agree with, is that we need more public funding for research and development to increase that knowledge base. And then at the same time, stronger regulatory and governance frameworks to enable that research to happen effectively. And then hopefully in the long term, some broader, more comprehensive governance framework that can more proactively govern ocean CDR. And so since we put out that report over the last year, we've kind of started a coordinated push to get that federal funding, hopefully. So we've worked with a number of other environmental groups in the US to do joint appropriations requests and outreach on the Hill, and just education of policymakers, because lots of people don't know what ocean CDR is, or CDR at all. And I guess the last thing I'll just mention is that WRI plays a role in the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. We have a whole ocean program as well that we've collaborated with on a lot of this work. And so the high-level panel works with heads of state to help them integrate ocean into their climate action plans. And the most recent Ocean Solutions report that they just put out in September includes marine CDR for the first time. So that's an update from the 2019 report, which didn't include it. So interest is growing for sure.
Is this on? Yeah, okay, great. Great, so thanks so much everyone for your opening remarks and sort of some background. I'd like to get into some sort of conversation now. And I'd like to hear, I guess, everyone's view on this. We've heard a number of times now that, ocean alkalinity enhancement is one of several carbon dioxide removal approaches being developed. And I'd like to just talk a little bit about, what are the opportunities when it comes to ocean alkalinity enhancement within this broader portfolio, but also what are some of the risks that are associated with it? Anyone want to start? Yeah.
I'm happy to start. I'm sure Jessie will have more to talk about in terms of OA mitigation to ocean acidification mitigation. So, yeah, and thinking about the opportunities and risks, ocean alkalinity enhancement, increasing the amount of basic materials you're putting into the ocean can potentially have local impacts for ocean acidification. I want to highlight there that, the methods that we're pursuing for carbon dioxide removal might be slightly different than the techniques we're using to get at ocean alkalinity enhancement as a coastal resilience mechanism or an OA mitigation mechanism, right? Like, for example, there was just a paper published with our NOAA-supported co-authors, and they show signs of deep sea acidification. So in terms of combating deep sea acidification, if you're adding alkalinity at depth, then that alkalinity might not be necessarily increasing the surface ocean's ability to breathe in, draw down carbon dioxide, right? So there's kind of this intersection, which I think is a great opportunity to both learn like when we should be deploying ocean alkalinity enhancement and what methods should we be doing so, both for CDR and this coastal resilience technique. For CDR, if you're talking about these things at scale, I think a lot of the risks are highlighted in the great best practices for ocean alkalinity enhancement that just came out, and there's a panel on this morning. One risk that's maybe not so front and center in that report is the risks for scaling ocean alkalinity enhancement. So there are certain byproducts that are produced with some methods of creating this basic material, right? If you're doing that with electrochemistry, you might be producing an acid byproduct, right? Where does that acid go? We need to think through that issue. If we're mining materials for ocean alkalinity enhancement, how are we doing that ethically, responsibly? And so I think we're at that stage in this field where we're starting to drive forward the foundational research. So now we can think about how can we engage in new innovation that can really create sustainable scaling of these techniques. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And I think from the Alliance perspective to the question, or what are the opportunities of OAE versus other CDR strategies? I think the biggest one that we've had conversations around in our exec team and across our membership is that of scale, right? So yes, and we want to talk about global versus local, and then temporal, now versus later, but also recognizing that when you get outside of scale, talking about real storage and measure and monetizing, outside of that world, thinking about a local scale opportunity to adapt and build resilience. So these are things like what can we be doing now? Can we get that lagoon more time? Can we get can we have this, shellfish farmer sustain through X periods of stress or different seasons? Can we have different life stages of different species be more protected during critical periods at a very local scale? And that's not crazy new. I mean, I talk about the oyster hatchery growers that we had in Washington and Oregon that had experienced the direct impacts of ocean acidification, and their hatcheries that they were just pumping in seawater from the coast, and that the water pH was too low that they couldn't form their shells to a more mature state. One of the tactics that they've been using for several years is to treat their seawater, right? So it's not a brand new concept to be able to do these in concentrated and local scales. So I think those are really the things that, from the Alliance perspective, when we talk about remediating ocean acidification, the potential to adapt and buy some time and build resilience in really concentrated ways, definitely is a direction that more research, obviously, is the caveat to all of this, is interesting and meaningful, I think, for a lot of local scale operations. I think the other thing I would say is that, the caution or the risk, I'm sensitive to some extent that, accelerating a natural processes is still to some extent not natural. I mean, you can still say that about CO2, and the extent that we've been accelerating CO2 into the atmosphere is also not a natural input to our balance. That said, I think that that's really why being able to prioritize work on the monitoring and research verification is so critical. It's a big opportunity, and really thinking, as Gabby said, not just on the science questions, but the policy and the more than the policy, the outcomes that we're trying to solve for with some of these first pilot projects. And recognizing if it's not going to be big scale that we can get to yet, or if we're still moving to bigger scale questions, how can we think about the right type of monitoring, verification, reporting on these type of local scale outcomes, and just having that distinction in mind when we're thinking about designing projects, so that we're not categorizing all of them as the potential for scale when we do have a lot of opportunities to think about that local remediation.
Great. Yeah, really insightful answer so far. I think one thing that I want to add in and layer in is also something that Katie touched on in the report that you were talking about, to recommend and call for more research. I think as we're assessing what the potential risks and potential benefits might be, thanks to some of the funding that NOAA has already put in motion, we're gonna know more if that same question is asked in a year from now or 2 years from now, as some of these studies are coming back from the pilots, and there's successful examples of startups partnering with national labs in the U.S. or partnering with governments around the world and academic researchers to be able to collect and understand this data. So I do think this. This quest for research, this quest to be able to really quantitatively answer this question is critically important, and for us to continue to ask it as the research is taking place. And to drill, and then to start drilling deeper in terms of, well, what do we know right now? I think when we think about carbon removal pathways and ocean alkalinity enhancement in particular, what is it doing for carbon, and what is it, carbon dioxide, and what is it doing for the environment? I think there's multiple MCDR pathways for the ocean, and we briefly touched on blue carbon. That has shorter duration storage than ocean alkalinity enhancement. When we're talking about length of storage for OAE, that's longer term duration. That starts to get into 1,000 years, 10,000 years. The different pathways might have different lengths of time, but you can really make CO2 inert for a long period of time, and that's often held up as one benefit. Not that that's necessarily oppositional to or against blue carbon or other shorter duration carbon removal pathways, but I think for folks who are really looking to lock CO2 away for a long time, I'd point to that as a benefit on the carbon side. When we think about ecosystem benefits, because I do think each carbon removal pathway introduces a set of co-benefits for the environment as well, this antacid metaphor of we do have a problem with a fairly acute crisis with the alkalinity, the acidification that's in the ocean today. And so if we can have localized benefits to address that through OAE, I think that's starting to help improve and repair. And again, that is probably more at the local level than thinking about the planetary scale of the entire ocean as we're starting on these pilots, but still a benefit to look at. On the risk side, I guess one final thing I'd say before going over to Katie to have you expand as well is I want to touch on a risk that's not only a risk for ocean alkalinity enhancement, but I think a risk that is pointed to for a lot of carbon removal pathways. When in that chart that Adam was showing at the start, which I thought was a great graphic, carbon removal is one small slice of the equation, and the vast majority is emissions reductions. And there can be a risk that a risk that could be posed. A question that is asked is how can we make sure that carbon removal does not detract or take attention away from that important work of reducing emissions, whether that's ocean alkalinity enhancement or any carbon removal pathway. I do think that the carbon removal community has answers through that. One that's been put forward, a letter that's been signed by more than 100 organizations, is a call for twin targets, so that if there's a net zero pledge, there's specificity about how much carbon is being reduced and how much carbon is being removed. We're seeing evidence of twin targets taking place in government pledges, something like what California Air Resources Board has put out, clear targets where we know with more specificity how much reductions and how much removals. And I think just making sure that we're talking about the both and, that it's reductions and removals. And then when we're talking about removals, we're talking about a smaller slice of the pie than what reductions are. I think that that's just an important overall context to keep in mind as we're having the conversation on OAE, but having the conversation on carbon removal in general.
Yeah, well, I guess I don't have too much to add. I think the three other panels covered most of it. I guess I was just going to touch on a few things. So I think when you're looking at the range of ocean CDR approaches, ocean alkaline, there's different ways to categorize it. And one way is abiotic and biotic. And when you're looking at those two different types of approaches, there are different kind of impacts, risks, uncertainties associated with those general groupings. And so ocean alkalinity enhancement falling into the abiotic side, there's some things we can say about that. But I think we know some amount about the risks, the potential, the benefits, and the uncertainties, but also we really need a lot more research funding to understand the extent of these risks, under what circumstances they arise, how severe they are, et cetera. And I guess the way I was thinking about categorizing the risks is those associated with the actual removal itself, like how fast does this take, how long is the duration of storage, probably pretty long, but so with the removal itself, and then I guess there's also risks of like precipitation of calcium carbonate, and not to get too technical, but and then, as Ben said, in terms of the environmental and ecological impacts, so is the approach effective, and then also what are its ecological impacts? And then I think there's also important impacts on land. If you're talking about scaling this up, that's going to involve increased mining activity of alkaline feedstocks. It's going to involve transport to coastal areas, and then increased shipping activity in the ocean to distribute this material. And then I think lastly, considering the impacts of stopping alkalinity enhancement, like what happens if you do this for a while and then you stop? Are there rebound effects that potentially rapidly increase acidification again, and what are the impacts of that? I will stop there.
Thanks, everyone. So one of the reasons for getting this group together is that it's we're getting perspectives from a lot of different viewpoints on this topic. I'm a scientist, but the scientist, it can take us far, right, in terms of the research, but it's only going to get us so far. Like, this is really a societal issue. Society has to be involved. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about, who you see are the sort of key invested users in this space that you've seen sort of wanting to collaborate, and how do we enable and encourage collaboration in terms of ocean alkalinity enhancement and marine CDR in general? Katie, we can sort of snake this back.
Reverse the order.
Yeah.
So I think the role of collaboration is critical across CDR. It's probably even more critical in ocean CDR because, of course, the ocean is a shared resource. And if I do some ocean CDR activity or alkalinity enhancement activity here, the effects of that, positive or negative, may shift somewhere else and affect you, and you possibly didn't even know I was going to do that. So I think there's a critical role in terms of collaboration, both on the research side and the governance side. And I think there's a lot of, increased interest has happened around this topic. There's a lot of people talking about it, and I think it's improving, but I think it's still somewhat in silos. We need more conversations across academia, scientists, legal experts on the governance side, indigenous peoples that have stewarded this land for generations and really understand it, and ocean conservation groups, climate groups. So all these different perspectives, I think, need to be talking to each other more to understand, what all our different perspectives are, where we can agree, where we have points of contention, and to kind of lay the ground rules for how we're going to go forward on this. And I think it's ultimately kind of balancing the urgency of the impacts of climate versus the potential negative impacts of doing ocean alkalinity in an irresponsible way. And so collaboration, shared research, communication can just increase the knowledge pool more quickly and help us make more informed decisions on that balancing question.
Yeah, definitely agree with Katie's list. I think that's a great rundown, and it shows how multifaceted this is, that it requires that collaboration, that there are a lot of different interested parties who have a stake in it. So agreed with the list that Katie ran through. I think I just add a particular comment onto the local communities where pilots or research is taking place. And an example I would give here for why this matters and why it's important is just I don't think local support should be taken as a given. And I think we've seen this, a lesson that can be learned is, I think in early solar and wind projects and the renewable energy now, the renewable energy industry, I think is doing a lot of proactive engagement now. But early on, folks just thought, well, while these projects deliver good environmental benefits, communities will be supportive of them, the risks to communities are low. But there was some assumptions there, and there's still projects being litigated. Just a couple of weeks ago, an offshore wind project in New York got a permit denied. And I mentioned that offshore wind in particular because I think that project hit up against concerns from local constituents as soon as you start touching the ocean. What does it mean for the beach? What does it mean for fishing? What does it mean for all of those different areas that have to be answered and addressed? And so I do think in the case of ocean alkalinity enhancement or any MCDR pathway, there are opportunities to proactively engage, address, and work with communities. That's where that online training that I was mentioning at the start, that CDR-RDT, comes in for us, where we worked with an advisory committee of environmental justice experts and different practitioners of community engagement to really start to drill down and look at what that looks like. And I think really making sure that two-way dialogue is happening and that it's happening early before research is scaling up is going to be a really important part of the conversation. One part of it, I think, it's a yes and to everything that Katie was saying for all of the different groups, for academic conversations and all of those different parties.
Well, you guys know, because I work with policymakers, I'm a sucker for policymakers and decision makers. So that's my first answer as far as the stakeholders that really need to be more engaged on this particular topic. And I'm not just talking about the siting and the regulation, although that is definitely in the purview of the policymaking and decision-making role on this topic, but also really informing and articulating the desired outcomes, really helping them understand and articulate what are they seeking to accomplish with some of these different pilots in their areas. And so how does it fit in with their broader mitigation or adaptation goals, and making sure that they're educated enough to be able to articulate that is a really important part, I think, of just a broader stakeholder community that we don't always think of in that way. I'd also, just adding on sort of community, tribal and indigenous, not just engagement, but often in many places have sovereign and human rights aspects associated with shared management or access to marine resources, and making sure that those either existing sovereign rights or human rights related to those shared marine resources are taken into account in this context. I'll also just shout out the OA practitioner community as a really important stakeholder in this particular work. So we have, a regional network of OA scientists organized across different regional hubs, and really making sure that this work is complementary, is supporting their work, using their expertise, and integrating their work in different locations where these pilots are taking place is really important. And one thing that I'll note, although those in the audience or on this panel can correct me and help me through this point, and I'll bring it up maybe next question as well, is about what does responsibility look like from a research agenda perspective. But I just want to add that baseline development is a really big question when we're thinking about doing this in the field. And so there's lots of places in the world that don't have baselines around ocean acidification in a meaningful way. And so that is when I say bringing the stakeholder, OA researchers as part of a stakeholder community on these types of pilots, that's really, really critical because of that issue. So we can talk about that on the last question. And then finally, I'll just note that, one of the things that we're trying to do through the Alliance is to get our stakeholders, our government members, to create something called OA action plans, which is what you would imagine it is. It's sort of their perspective on priority work around ocean acidification domestically, whether that's nationally or subnationally. And the U.S. is releasing their OA action plan at this COP on the 10th of December, which I'm very excited for. But within that OA action plan is a whole section around their marine carbon dioxide removal research agenda, and the need to make sure that the MCDR research is part of their OA strategy moving forward domestically. So hopefully that will provide a blueprint for helping governments and other stakeholders think about how they put these two issues together, and think about trade-offs and priority research, and again, different localized outcomes that they're looking for, whether it's mitigation or adaptation.
Thanks, Jessie. And I can attest that, yes, we are definitely trying to engage the OAE community. I'm based in the Ocean Acidification program at NOAA, and I'm right now the only CDR employee that's solely focused on CDR at the agency. I also wanted to layer on a few specific groups. I think we have a really robust group of invested users and parties here, but specifically to call out, coastal managers, both within the U.S. and internationally, as very important groups to engage with. And I did promise we would circle back to our Fast Track Action Committee that the U.S. government has recently stood up on marine CDR. I'll very briefly describe that. The group has 3 main actions, the first of which is thinking about regulatory frameworks, permitting, and policy around marine CDR. The second is a U.S. research investment in marine CDR. And the third is a coordination vehicle for public-private partnerships for marine CDR. And I think that this group is really keen on leveraging the experience and the voices that are represented in the larger community. Specifically, we're going to be holding listening sessions, likely in the spring of 2024. And so this is kind of my call to you all. Please track the progress of this Fast Track Action Committee in the U.S. and be sure to contribute to these listening sessions. Bring your stance about marine CDR and ocean alkalinity enhancement to those conversations, so that we can have those represented in an implementation plan moving forward.
Great. So I want to leave a little bit of time for questions from the audience. So maybe we can just kind of rapid fire. It's kind of a beefy question to do rapid fire, but maybe just one thought on what responsible development of ocean alkalinity enhancement looks like from your perspective. Someone with a mic want to start?
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, I guess I was just going to mention 3 things, which have kind of been mentioned already in the other questions, but the importance of community engagement, and as part of that, identifying who is the community that you're engaging, which I think can be a challenging question in some cases, and ensuring that you have engagement before the project, during the project, and after the project. And then along with that, transparency, which I think is part of the engagement, but transparent data, transparent information about potential impacts, and then impacts that actually did happen, and then monitoring on the efficacy and the impacts, environmental impacts. And I think a lot of thought has gone into this around codes of conduct as kind of like a soft governance mechanism on the way to regulation. And so if you haven't seen it, the Aspen Institute has a recent publication on ocean CDR codes of conduct, not specific to alkalinity enhancement, but broader. And so that's, I think, a really great resource. The one maybe last thought I'll say is that I think that sets out great principles. And I think there's, in some cases, a gap between what we ideally need to be doing and what the capacities are on the ground in terms of who's doing this research today. Startups, researchers, they aren't necessarily equipped to be doing the social science today. So I think the question becomes, how do we build up that capacity to be able to meet these ideal principles that are put out in these codes of conduct and such?
Yeah, great responses from Katie. I think for me, I once again go to that the CDR RDT training where we worked with experts and startups to really try and unpack what does it look like, what are the frameworks for early engagement, how to begin, and so I won't summarize everything that's in that training and suite of resources, but it's online and would encourage folks to check it out. But there are some tactical and specific things that I think practitioners can consider. One example is this idea of picking multiple project sites and then doing community engagement early. And that's changing up how project development might have been taking place 50 years ago or 60 years ago, where someone lasers in on one site and that's the site and they're going to go forward. This lets a dialogue begin with a community to really find where that best mutual match is going to be, whether we're talking about ocean alkalinity enhancement or any CDR pathway. So that's one, but there's many best practices, many frameworks for this. The list goes on. And so I think to check out that training, that code from Aspen Institute that was just mentioned, there's a lot of resources out there, a lot of folks that are thinking about it. I'm definitely encouraged that there's so many folks in this room on a Saturday afternoon who want to be here thinking about it. And so I do think these conversations, these dialogues to be able to get into what are the risks, what are the benefits, how can we talk about it, how can we be working together is definitely an important element to bring into it as well.
Thanks, Ben. And of course, it's Saturday. We all forgot that because there's no weekends at COP, but it is Saturday, so good on all of us. I'll just quickly say, of course, yes, echoing monitoring, verification, reporting, yes, codes of conduct. There's been discussion, I think, this morning about a public registry or things along that nature for OAE projects. And that all is way above my pay grade, and smarter people are thinking about that outside of OA Alliance world. The only thing that I would add from our perspective is really, again, getting back to the baseline development question. So when we're thinking about what is responsible OAE research, it really is thinking about how can we use that local expertise for supporting and funding filling some of those regional knowledge gaps associated with having a baseline that you can even determine or evaluate an OAE project against. So the Ulo Tokelau spoke this morning and talked about the amazing OA program that they had running from 2014, and that funding ran out in 2021, and that there was inconsistency even in the ability to do some of that monitoring because of COVID. So that's a great example of a location that could use support continuing to build out that baseline, and so challenging maybe some of the companies, some of the private groups that are wanting to do some of these pilots, and thinking about how they can be supporting and incorporating that local work to make sure that that baseline is being built up as we're doing these projects at different sites. So that's my perspective on responsibility.
I echo everything that everybody said, and I just want to doubly echo Jessie's point about baseline measurements. Ocean carbon measurements are extremely limited in nature. They're expensive. These measurements are complicated to make. And in order to get at those baseline conditions and also understand the perturbation or the change that ocean alkalinity enhancement and other marine CDR strategies are having, we need those measurements globally and have a really robust carbon observing system.
All right. I think we have time for a question from the audience. We have a microphone that we can pass around. Yeah, anyone?
Oh, thank you. So my name is Toste Tanner. I'm from Geomar. I'm an ocean chemist. And I wanted to touch back on the baseline and, talking about the monitoring, reporting, and verification of the efficiency of these measurements. And we know that we don't have quite enough ocean carbon observations to provide that baseline. And what is your take on actually what would it take to be able to get that baseline and have a system in place that you can reasonable verify the efficiency and in the end the carbon credits for the measurements? I think this is a critical question that the industry that's going to invest millions and billions of dollars in this going to ask. So what is the percentage of the millions and billions of potential profit here that needs to go into that carbon observing system? Thank you.
I can maybe answer quickly. I don't have a number, but I think even for doing ocean alkalinity enhancement monitoring, we're going to need substantially cheaper ways to measure the carbon system in the ocean, pH, alkalinity, dissolved inorganic carbon. So I think the technology, there's a technology development aspect of this new industry that's going to support sort of democratizing these measurements in the ocean. I think that's really important. I just wanted to add that. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
The only thing I'll add is that I think modeling is going to be a critical component of that, right? And creating these machine learning algorithms, AI, those types of things that can then fill in where we don't have observations. Those, of course, have to be rooted in our observations, though. But I think you hit on a great opportunity for investment, especially from the private sector, that can complement this field that we might not be seeing investment going there quite yet right now.
I think that's all the time we have. So thanks so much to our panelists, and thank you all for sticking with us for the hour.